Hello, welcome everybody to the next episode on the Blue Squad on Health, where some veterans in the digital health industry speak about things that annoy them or try to explore more and discover what is going on and cut to the chase. Today, we are going to talk to Aliaksei. Until recently was the CTO and co-founder of Carity Care. He comes with a very impressive resume, and we are going to talk to him about patient engagement applications. So I'm trying to dumb it down, but it's much more than that. They were doing a lot of collecting PROMs and since we are related to value-based care, it is of utmost importance to us to see his journey and what worked, what did not work, and all the other things. So let me also say hello to Andreas.
Hello.
And go from there. Who wants to go next? Aliaksei, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Sam. I'm Aliaksei. Yes, I was a CTO of Carity until very recently, and that was a great journey. I can speak a lot about it for years. Yes, a lot was done right. Yes, something is difficult. We'll maybe touch upon this. But it's a pleasure to be in the group where I feel myself a veteran. I'm not that old. I don't feel myself that old yet. But still, in digital health, everyone can feel themselves a veteran. I'm here for 14 years doing the patient journeys, medical devices, software as a medical devices, related software development. And yeah, it's really a long journey. Just background-wise, I'm coming from the computer science, particularly theoretical computer science, and I switched right after the academia into Sonova first, and later
in fact, you hold a doctorate in computer science.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
There is a separate story how it's possible that a theoretical computer scientist end up in the medical device manufacturer. Let's not even get there. It just happened to be a lucky coincidence.
You should ask how quantum chemists end up in digital health. So
everyone has its own story. But practically, I spent last 14 years doing patient journeys, and it's like that gave me a bit of the insight in all the phases of what can be improved in various steps of healthcare provider work, manufacturer work, care facilities to a certain extent. Big part of it was dedicated to how to help engineers to do regulated development efficiently, because a lot right now is in this world, there is a regulatory team, there is quality assurance team, and there is engineering team, and 8 out of 10 cases, they will not talk to each other nicely. So, and a lot of efficiency is lost in this process, while it should not be the case. Both parties are trying to do best for their quality work. Had some exposure to that, and I was lucky to drive some of the nice teams to do a regulated development, including the team at Carity, very effective, a small legal manufacturer, nice little team that was remote first across Europe largely. Great experience. We can talk about it later.
All right. So let me just start with this my interest being mostly in value-based healthcare. So it covers a spectrum, right? You start with providing quality care at most efficient costs. That's pretty much. So you need to be able to analyze both costs and outcomes too. So there are different stages. I just classify it. There's the analytics piece. Then there is the operational side or the care pathways. So how efficiently you can implement care pathways and plan care coordination and, the treatment story or treatment pathways itself, and how that can be made more efficient with preventative care and all those other things. And then after you do all these things, how do you understand whether there has been a better outcome? So patient engagement, patient navigation, and these measures that patients report becomes critical. So in that sense, your piece with regard to PROMs or the patient reported. So just tell me, you were in cardiology, right? Carity Care.
Cardiac rehabilitation specifically.
Right. Tell us more a little bit about that.
So let's try to imagine what happens with the cardiac patient, myocardial infarction patient these days. So first of all, they are saved after having a heart attack. It's really the most crucial state. They are saved, and a lot is happening already during this so-called phase 1. And after they're being brought to a stable condition, everything is settled for them, they are then recommended to continue to a phase 2, which is cardiac rehabilitation phase. And today in Switzerland, for instance, we speak about the inpatient and outpatient types of it. Inpatient, that's when a patient is brought to another clinic that is less of the intervention care and the facility that focuses on helping people to get back on their feet and get a little bit more active. It's like usually the patients are still quite weak at that stage. But thanks to all the recent advances, phase 2 can also be done outpatiently, meaning the patient is sent home and receive an invite to attend a gym-like facility somewhere in the nearby clinic. It can be directly in the clinic. It can be somewhere sport facility nearby in a nearby village. There are various flavors of it. But what's important, it still requires patient to travel 3 to 5 times a week to the facility in order to do sport in the observed medical condition. And this is today's system in Switzerland pays for 9 to 12 weeks of such recovery process. And that's it. That's the maximum the system can allow. And we know already from all the research, there's a lot of research done in rehabilitation, that that's not enough. In order to get better, you actually need to continue with this program that you start in these weeks by yourself. And we also learn from the research that this by yourself just doesn't work for the biggest part of the population. People get back to couch and that's it. People don't trust themselves when they are left alone after these initial phases. There's a lot of patients would benefit from some additional support. And this is where our idea with cardiac rehabilitation steps in, where we've been building up a system which helps care teams set up a personalized programs for patients such that they continue being monitored by health coaches, being monitored by their friends and relatives, being monitored by some other form of group therapy for weeks and weeks and weeks to come. And this ensures the life-changing attitude.
Kind of like resetting their lifestyle itself.
Exactly. So practically, it's like, think it this way. If there would be a magic device that once you put it on a person, makes this person an athlete in mind, that they just go for a jog all the time, they go for a triathlon, whatever it is, physical activity. It changes their mind into physical activity. That would be it. That would be an ideal cardiac rehabilitation as well. We just need to be careful with the ranges where it's, your heart is working during these phases. And we've been trying to build this magic wand for cardiac patients. At the same time, this is maybe a right moment to speak where the shortcomings of this appear.
Exactly. So, what I would like to learn more about is why it did not succeed to the way that you thought it would, right? So I had a couple of questions on that. So one is, why did you decide that it has to be an SaMD, right? Was there any law for it to be an SaMD? And so that justification, right? And then going forward, even though you established, and then you can talk about the clinical study aspect of it, even though you established that this is a positive outcome for patients, why weren't there enough adoption, right? Who were the barriers? And then at the end, we might actually talk about the system itself, which we discussed in an earlier conversation. So just giving you some pathways to go forward. And Andreas, feel free to talk. I'm not stifling you, I hope.
Okay. So let's, first of all, when we look about any nice idea in the digital health space these days, we have to acknowledge one important aspect. It needs to be integrated into the flow of how healthcare is funded in each specific country. And this is a different flow in each country of its own. We originally focused on DACH countries and specifically Switzerland to just put ourselves on the market.
For people who don't know what DACH countries are, it is Germany and Switzerland, right?
And Austria.
And Austria.
And Austria. Okay. Because I myself learned recently when I was trying to register for Slosh or something, they asked DACH country and I'm like, what the hell is DACH?
And practically, this is where direct motivation to become a SaMD comes first to a table. That is, in order to be in the reimbursement considerations for most of these systems, you have to be a medical device. And medical device is considered to be a certified medical device. And therefore, you have to be prepared to demonstrate that you've stepped through all the regulatory burdens in order to be considered for reimbursement.
That is, if your revenue model is based on reimbursement. If, for instance, this is a clarificatory question. For instance, if the patient thinks, like any app, any exercise app, if the patient is willing to pay for it, you don't necessarily have to go and become an SaMD. The SaMD certification.
The problem here comes that if the patient is willing, and here is the hard truth of this process. Unfortunately, majority of patients, especially in DACH region, they are accustomed that everything medical is covered. And therefore, they are not willing to pay for it. It's especially the problem in Germany. There is a famous joke about people are willing to pay for their digital health for their pets way more than for digital health for themselves. Just because they're accustomed to this is paid and this is I have to cover myself.
Aliaksei, I have maybe a picky question, but it goes a little bit to what Sam was asking. So you were positioning Carity at the end of the day for the reasons you just explained as a digital therapy, meaning behavioral change, a digital tool enabling or supporting behavioral change of patients after a heart attack.
Correct.
Or rehabilitation patients after a heart attack.
Correct.
I get it correctly. Now, I think if we look into, and you said in the Central European healthcare systems, this is all around, is it paid or is it not paid? Is it reimbursed or is it not reimbursed? And otherwise, after you said something like 9 to 12 months, a patient is considered healthy again.
Yes.
Even though behavioral wise, we know after that time, nothing changed actually, or only a fraction of patients will adopt to a new life behavior, whatever, which should lower their risk and
right.
Their
9 to 12 weeks would be too low of adoption. 9 to 12 months, that would be where it changes quite substantially.
Okay. But now my question, if we look at healthcare systems like the US, where you have kind of risk taking organizations where you are with a healthcare provider who is in the same time your insurer, usually similar applications, they're just part of their let's call it customer or user or patient experience.
Correct. So you can
they would never talk of it as a digital therapy. They would just say that's part of our patient HCO interaction or patient HCP interaction. It supports the process. It minimizes the risks we are bearing as a modern.
For a digital health app company, they have to look at how is the best possible way for them to
That's exactly the point where I'm after, yeah? And the question, if we always have a clear understanding of what the market of such a digital health company or a digital health app is.
Okay, so let's be careful comparing US and EU in general and Switzerland as well with regards to how exactly this is positioned. Because positioning in general, if you look into the same instruments that are considered medical devices in MDR/MDDO sense, FDA would consider them devices of low concern, and this would position them and like, we don't need to regulate the space, and they can name themselves whatever they want. And therefore, often they straight away, knowing that they would not hit the barrier of this must be certified before it's even considered, they start with the much simpler naming and positioning and kind of something that looks like a medical intended use, but it's actually not an intended use. Although functionality-wise, it's a lot the same. So for instance, I'll give you one example here. When we planned our system, we straight away decided that we're not going to use for monitoring of biological parameters, we will not be using dedicated medical devices, we will be using consumer-grade wearables, like Apple Watches, Polar devices. They are not medical devices per se, but in the context of cardiac rehabilitation, we are able to put risk control measures with the help of our medical device, software as a medical device, such that suddenly the Apple Watch becomes a part of the medical ecosystem for that specific intended use. We cannot magically cover all possible use cases, but the specific case of the cardiac reha, perfectly works. The same approach, by the way, the Apple themselves are using for functions like software as a medical device feature, hearing instrument on top of the AirPod, ECG apps, etc. They're playing the same game. But what else is important when we think about the US versus European market? Even in Europe itself, I would be able to name several countries where I would go very different paths in terms of reimbursement compared to what we were trying to achieve in Switzerland. In Switzerland, we aim to get reimbursed as a medical device that offers 12 months, 52 weeks of the program support. In France, for instance, it would go under a tool that is providing monitoring with the elevated levels of, they have several special levels that when you are able to demonstrate support with PROs, efficacy, and ultimate, when you are able to show that you actually save people mortality rate, like improve the mortality rate, that's the highest reimbursement level. So it would be immediately completely different positioning. I believe it's still required to be a medical device for that positioning. However, you might need different levels of it. You might go for different certifications just to get into this pipeline to be considered there. So one essential thing is to be a medical device is because in Switzerland, you have to be a medical device in order to be considered for reimbursement. But then the second part is if you're talking to doctors, cardiologists, they need to see your tool as a trusted product. Something that is medical device regulated, something that has clinical efficacy demonstrated in some way. It immediately helps if you talk to some people in cardiology to be a medical device. That's another reason. Ultimately, I can also look into the regulation itself, and compared to US variant, I can argue that regulatory framework in Switzerland and in Europe in general simply requires us to be a medical device because our device has a medical intent. We help
And this
patients.
brings me to one of the major points that I want to make in this podcast is if Europe really wants to become competitive in innovation, as US does, at least there should be a European Union-wise regulatory framework for this kind of devices. I don't know whether there is, you might be able to tell me, but sounds like from your experience, it looks like you have to go through these hoops for each country, even within DACH. When you frame it as DACH, you have to go with Germany in a certain way. And that just stifles companies like yourself, and you can never scale up or build something innovative. Now, based on your conversation last time, Switzerland is a very small market, right? And it was a test case. Like you said, it's going to be 30,000 people approximately who are the potential market, and who will actually use might be half of that. Now, that is not enough for an investment criteria which could run into millions. I'm not saying tens of millions, but running into millions. So if you want to succeed, the framework, the regulatory framework is itself working against you. And Europe cannot bring world-class companies that way. I mean, there's a statement, I could be wrong.
I think you need to keep two things apart. Switzerland is a little bit special because it's technically not part of the European Union. Let's park this as a minor issue on the side. Medical device regulation point of view, European Union has a unified approach. No matter whether you're in Spain or in Sweden or in Germany, you have to fulfill the same aspects in order to become a certified medical device. What you're referring to, Sam, this is just that every country has a different healthcare system. Now, in order to be reimbursed, or in order to get money for what you're doing, or in order to understand how you drive patient adoption or prescriber adoption, or what it is in that particular healthcare system, country by country, these systems bear totally different incentive systems.
No, I think that was the point I wasn't saying medical device, I said regulatory framework, right? Even the models, it should be somehow unified if you want to do that.
Right. I've had actually that Europe is working towards that. There is a concept of European-wide template for so-called health technology assessment. And that's something that can be distantly matched to a Swiss framework of criteria where device demonstrates that its application is economically effective and it's not blowing up the entire reimbursement pipeline in a specific country. But Right now, this is where the difference to value-based care versus the system like it is today standard in Switzerland becomes very prominent. Because in the value-based care, integration of long-term rehabilitation instruments, specifically with the observability of patient in the process of rehabilitation, long-term observability, that's almost like a no-brainer. It's almost trivial to demonstrate that the economic efficiency is there. But if you are in a system where each stakeholder needs to get a bit of their interest satisfied in order to have system introduced, this is where it's very difficult to prove it. Cardiac rehabilitation is a great example because inside the European Society of Cardiology guidelines, it's already a class 1A recommendation, meaning it's absolutely proven to the maximum level that this is effective and it's a must. Still, in order to be introduced in a system where there is no financial incentive, for instance, for physiotherapist, you would have to struggle somehow. You would have to kind of find something that allows the people to get it used, and some reimbursement, some hours can be calculated into this. It doesn't exist a standard path for that.
So in your story or in your life within Carity Care, that was one of the main impediments for you.
Correct.
With the reimbursement model.
We clearly see the interest, but then like people, in order to start working with something new, they have to be understanding how is their time spent with it and what is their reimbursement flow into this process. Because right now there is no, except the patient and the overall medical system, there is no other interest for physios and doctors to spend time with the extra tool because they're not get paid.
The physios and doctors are not economically incentivized even to recommend your tool. And I think that probably was the primary cause. Other than, did it take longer for you to get certified as a medical device or to go through the process of certification?
That's a separate process. We started it like we completed it last summer with no big deal, even considering that the notified bodies for medical devices according to MDR are not available in Switzerland. So we had to work with the notified bodies externally in Sweden, in our case, for instance. That's not something too complicated. Like, it's known how to do these things because a lot of people are getting through it time and time again. Where the complexity is, okay, now it is a medical device, so now you are allowed to submit documentation to authorities to consider for reimbursement, and this is where a very interesting journey started.
Now, is that process expensive? Because again, if other companies who have to follow this path that you took and they want to come in and they have to get certified as a medical device, is that process very expensive? Because we did that process and it cost us, at least just the consulting itself cost us in hundreds of thousands of francs.
Correct. And this is exactly that expensive because it's hundreds of consulting hours to be accounted for. It's not like the people are trying to make something incorrect. It's just that there is a lot of work to be spent to invent a model for cost effectiveness analysis, for budget impact assessment for each individual small app coming to the market. Practically, in our case, we had a great collaboration together with the Institute of Health Economy in Winterthur, and this is where I learned a lot and how it works these days. So thanks, kudos to them. At the same time, in our private discussions, we had the following learning: we are a tiny project for them. For us, it's an extremely big amount of money to spend for consulting like this.
So
the process is optimized for compounds, for pharma, for something that costs millions out of the box. So like, it's just a different process.
And their billing is based on pharma standards who have billions of dollars that they can spend. So even if you ask for consulting, they come out with outrageous quotes. And one of the things that my company was trying to do, so we have a platform that people can white label and alter it to make their own devices or their own apps, which can be SaMD. So the process was we get certified and they can piggyback on that certification and get the additional part certified through their process. And I believe your experience also was gained by working in one of these companies. I think Bright Insights was one of these companies who helped. So did that experience help you on that front?
That was a great experience for me for regulatory development, especially cloud-based regulatory development, and how to find a good separation where a piece has to be considered a medical device and therefore developed within the regulatory framework, and how to build something where you can consider this a regular application without a need to include all of the additional functionality in this application and this patient-facing application into the regulated space. So it's actually quite an experience-based field, I would say, to know for each therapeutic area, to know for specific functionalities, what is the medical part and what needs to be covered and what can be developed under simpler SDLC.
And so when you started the company, you did not consider using, sorry about that, Andreas, I'll just stop with this question and then you can go ahead. Did you consider using a similar kind of platform on which you could build an SaMD, thereby reducing your cost? This is a self-serving question because I'm in the business, so I'm going to be very open about that question.
So in our specific case in Carity, there was of course a lot of thinking about what are the possible regulatory architectures of this pipeline. What was definitive in the end is that it was clear that we're building a patient-facing tool, and we want to delay as much as possible any doctor-facing tool such that we integrate at a later stage with someone who is providing doctor-facing instruments. So we're not optimizing ourselves to be yet another dashboard for a doctor. We know the doctors hate yet another dashboard. We need to be integrated in the EHR directly. And therefore, the system under Carity has a full preparation to be fire integrated and every other provider of EHR that is used in the clinic. And at the same time, there is another thing, is medical device. You need to do a lot of risk analysis / risk control measures in order to take something as an Apple Watch and integrate it in the medical context. For that reason, the risk control measures that we have been doing, they are largely on the patient upside. So we kind of considered Carity system, largely a patient app, to be a piece that's running as a medical device, while our API functionality is largely a support functionality. At least in the very first iterations, we don't need to put medical functionality there. Decision algorithms of some sort.
Talking of how expensive it is to come to a medical device certification, that's one thing. And in that context, you need to run eventually certain studies in order to prove certain things, which cost you a fortune, whatever. But now, if you think of introducing such a product on a market, then certification is not necessarily enough. It's kind of the license to play in the market, but it's not the license to win in the market. Many people always say, what's all this medical device certification all about if the products then are still no good?
Yes.
So my question would be the following now. You having made that journey several times and having gained all that experience, what would you recommend young, or let's call them digital health startups, digital health products and product companies, when it comes to what studies should you actually invest early on in order to win in that market at the end of the day?
Let's be careful. I'm speaking from the position of someone who hasn't passed the full pass.
I just want to come back to the how expensive it is to become a medical device, but I don't know. It's just a gut feeling out of the moment. I have the feeling to win in that market, the study piece and so on is even much more expensive. So if already the medical device piece you feel being very expensive, then probably or either not working with the right assumptions or you're not funded enough.
Correct. Especially if we think about the full scale of studies that can be used. A lot of times we see the successful digital health startups starting from so-called free studies, when it was the academical study fully funded by, let's say, InnoSwiss or some other organization, and then out of that study, the product is built.
Yeah.
It's a great case if it's possible. At the same time, if it's not always possible to run something through the cycle if the knowledge is quite old.
Yes.
Let's say in case of the cardiac reha, it's already there. It's already known that we have to do it this way. So let me cut back to the studies that actually make sense a lot to start with. And here we speak about the regulatory framework that allows you to start so-called usability studies, first formative and then summative. There's a very interesting trick here. As a digital health startup, in theory, you are not allowed to just create some MVP and go out to the hospital and start using it with the patients. That's legally not allowed. It's like you are to become a legal manufacturer, so you're not allowed just to randomly poke people and consider them patients. However, regulatory framework encourages you to run this so-called usability studies. And this is a great instrument to get to hospitals, collaborate with hospitals, with private doctors, in order to actually test what you are doing in the real conditions.
And what you're saying is under the, let's say, bucket of usability studies, you could do a little bit more than what MDR is asking you for, which is just covering for potential usability risks, where it's all about patient safety. You could do with a little more money, probably you could actually generate evidence that it's not only safe, it's actually doing a good thing, or it's
Let's be careful here, because that's actually, there is a kind of this legal barrier here. The moment you say, oh, I actually want to publish a paper that proves my clinical efficacy, this is the moment when the ethics committee steps in and says, no, you're not. Because if you are going to do something like this, then you have to do a different...
You have to keep these things totally separate.
Right. In case of Carity, we had to do 3 formative studies, 1 summative study, and completely separated to it clinical trial that just runs on its own. It's actually still running.
And this is for what reason?
First of all,
to do with, you could actually influence the one readout required by XYZ through a other.
Let's kind of think back about the reimbursement, because reimbursement requires you to provide some evidence of cost effectiveness of what you are building. And this evidence needs to be produced by some form of the clinical usage. So when we stepped into position, okay, we are right now, we want to enter hospital. We want to enter more hospitals. Clinical trial is a mechanism, a little bit of like a marketing tool to get awareness in different hospitals where doctors are interested in running studies. That's 1. 2, if correctly formulated, even a small study, still an RCT study, like in case of Carity, is able to generate some inputs to cost effectiveness models that are prepared separately. So we prepare what is the model, but then the numbers from this study can be fed into the model to demonstrate advantages of the product, such that even with the small numbers, it's possible to get back to, let's say, BRG and ask for their reimbursement because some evidence exists. This is not possible in the usability studies. This material cannot be collected and large. It's not considered to be a real context. It's not considered to be RCT enough. Maybe in some other context, it's possible to tune something around it, but at least in case of cardiac reha, where we needed relatively long observation of patient, because we needed to have patient for months and months observed in the clinical trial, such that it's considered to be realistic with the real data. So that's a second important aspect of the clinical trial. Would it be possible to collect these numbers without starting a clinical trial, but by starting something like a pure commercial usage from day 0? Yes, but this is where a difficulty of getting into clinical context appears. It's when you're saying, okay, let's run a study such that doctors can publish something afterwards, you're welcome. If you're just to be deployed without a clinical evidence yet in a hospital, why a doctor would risk recommending something that doesn't have any proof yet?
Yeah.
You have to be in a very special context, like you need to be in a special big clinic partnership where clinical governance tells to doctors, now you must recommend it. That's maybe the other path, but it's very difficult to find such a condition in Switzerland. So we went with clinical trial.
So this brings me back to, you talked about partnerships and having good backers. And I think Carity was part of the evolution.
Yeah, evolution, yes.
Are you allowed to talk about that partnership or what they are?
Well, Evelyn is the biggest shareholder of Carity.
And what do they do?
Largely, the idea was circulated inside Evelyn until a team in 2021 picked up and started the company with it. That's basically, there was some market research. There was partner back then. Originally, it was a medical device, big medical device company that wanted to run this as a venture. But exactly around COVID, the appetite for that went away. But the idea itself was considered to be valid, and the company Carity was started in order to build everything that I was just describing. Medical device from scratch, usability studies, put it on the market, eventually try to reach the reimbursement and run the clinical trial for that.
So that zooming out or panning out, I've seen there are so many digital health startups, and we hear with a lot of fanfare when they are all funded. This one started, they raised this many millions, and this started, and they raised so many millions. I know that one of the companies that we were discussing earlier raised close to $1 billion. It was one of the biggest darlings at one point in time. And then we hear nothing about these people. That's one part. The second part is I also hear pharma is starting a pilot on this one. They're going to spend so much on this one and so much on this one. And I've spoken about this thing in this podcast a long time. Is pharma really serious about digital health? Because I don't see any evidence of that. Pilots, they do. They provide some sort of lip service. And I have always said, they are not in the business of digital health. They are in the business of manufacturing actual medicines. And so is this not getting into their DNA? They are not really serious about doing these things. And so is that a problem for digital health startups? Because that was one of the biggest funders, and they give, and being that at one point, and they fund through starting pilots. And so they give this false hope to digital health startups, and they spend so much time, and then the pilot gets pulled. A new CEO comes, they drop all things, and it gets pulled. And even when there is no potential in a market, because of the pilot, all this, intellectual effort is wasted because they are clinging on to this hope that there is a pilot and it could succeed and we are going to get this money out. So what do you think, what's your thoughts on that? And then we'll move on to the next value-based care, and again, about whether people are really serious about it. That's the second follow-up question that I would come to you.
I strongly believe that the primary obstacle for this innovation dissipation in many countries, in Switzerland specifically, it's the path to reimbursement. It's optimized for compounds, it's optimized for big manufacturers. The amount of time and money you need to invest in evidences in order to be in this position of be reimbursed is not for startups. And a lot of startups strongly underestimate this when they start. They immediately dive into patient value and then think that with a patient value it will be proven automatically for everyone that it's a useful thing. But unfortunately, there may be a patient value, but there is a strong disadvantage for healthcare economy, for hospitals. It's becoming more burdensome. There can be different parts of this puzzle. So building out early the economic modeling for whatever is the idea of a startup is important. And a lot of piloting can happen there. Specifically with the pharma pilots, quite often the situation ends up for all the digital health, either startups or pilots, that they turn into the tool to support a clinical trial. And to be honest, that's actually not the bad idea, because supporting a clinical trial in an effective way, and especially if the patient who is engaged with the additional tool, and it's possible to demonstrate that a patient, while being engaged with this additional tool, actually benefit from a new compound that is produced by a pharma, that's almost like a win-win situation. What often happens, by the way, is during the clinical trial, the efficacy numbers are great, and then the real drug comes to a market and suddenly the numbers are not there. And in retrospective, we can see that, well, it actually was the great tool, a great coach, a great someone sitting behind the process in clinical trial that indirectly, not like intentionally, biased the study. And now, without this instrument, the drug itself is not effective. That's why a lot of the companies right now are putting to have some companion apps coming with their drugs. And it's a big business by itself. I don't want to get there. But for instance, for Carity, one of the early decisions, maybe wrong decision, difficult to judge right now, was not to engage with pharma out of the box, because we intended to be transparent to doctors. That doctors are extremely afraid of pharma-backed entities that try kind of to talk to doctors and then immediately start to push through some new drugs to the market backed by the pharma. That's a real thing in the field. So we have to be careful not to get too tainted early in the distribution.
I think maybe one thing to add here, and Sam said it before, the pharma, they are medicines manufacturers or they developing medicines, and their companies are set up to distribute medicines at the end of the day, and they're not necessarily set up to distribute digital solutions or digital enterprise solutions, which many of these digital health systems or apps might be.
Is there any evidence that companion apps are successful? So in my understanding, there are two areas pharmas use digital health and that can really help, right? One is in the clinical studies, which I agree that is without software, you cannot do a substantial amount of clinical study because again, there is an incentive. It's basically the value-based care approach, PROL, that patient-reported measures, they do have to collect. And they are not reliant on insurance or because pharma has an interest in understanding what is the impact of the drugs. So they use this in clinical trials. I know that is part of their tool. But what I haven't seen any evidence, nor I haven't been convinced, and maybe it's my ignorance, that this post-marketed products or companion apps are being seriously looked at, two, whether they are being effective. I'm sure it can be effective if done properly, like, your own Carity app would have been one of those, like with medication that you take, you have to use this one, right? That could have been a great companion app, but why isn't pharma looking at it that way? And again, like I said, they are not really serious, and I haven't seen any evidence of the success of companion apps. For instance, if I'm taking a medication, I take blood pressure medication. First of all, even the messaging from Apple Watch every day, did you take your medication itself? The first 2-3 weeks, I was very religious about it. Nowadays, it's an annoying nuisance, actually. So that's my point. I think I made my point is thoughts, both you, Andreas. I think we have discussed this ad nauseam.
Yeah, I don't know. What's one thing to that question that comes to my mind is and I don't know, is there a drug which recently came to market which was co-labeled with a digital companion app? So that actually at the end of the day, you're only allowed to prescribe the drug if you're also prescribing the app. I think the issue, and we saw the same in the history of pharma with companion diagnostics, where diagnostics tests have been developed in order to stratify patients to know exactly which patient will react to a certain therapy or not, and so on. And also there, the concept of co-labeling a diagnostic product, a specific diagnostic product with a specific drug was always on the table. And I think I might be wrong, would have to do some research, but also there are not many products on the market which are kind of co-labeled in that way. And there is probably again a reason for that, because if as a pharma development team you are binding yourself in such a co-labeling into a strategic partnership or whatever, or into a totally different distribution model, patient HCP collaboration or engagement model or whatever, then you'd rather keep your hands off as good as possible, and you leave this to some other players in the healthcare market.
Correct.
But I have no clue how it is with apps.
Well, we by now have some history of diabetes companion apps. Some of them became quite prominent players, largely because they're driven by community interest, and community in diabetes is big. The same there is in the space of some rare diseases, where there are examples of almost like a parent group getting something up and running, and then it's becoming almost like a must for every drug that comes in the specific area and a specific rare genetic disease to be companioned by that solution. We also have some success stories, but all of these success stories are a little bit like an anecdote. almost like it was not expected this would be a success story, while everything else was expected to be a success story, and it worked out differently. There are cases where, for instance, some prosthetics came to market and had their own companion app, and because of just that, it was way simpler for doctors to take decision to use that prosthetics rather than the other, because then they are free from doing some form of activities or maintenance. I don't remember the exact details, but there are some stories where it have worked.
Well, I do have a very, very good example where it really worked and where it is kind of like what you call the product market fit. One of my customers make oral medical device that you put it in the mouth, and they, using our platform, they built a companion app for facial exercises. And this medical device will only succeed if the patient does this oral exercises. And it's not that they can come to the office every day when they're brushing their teeth. So it has to be. So it's a perfect niche in which this medical device and app works. And it is paid by the medical device maker. So it's not, and they roll that cost into the reimbursement model though. So they are not charging the app separately, and that succeeds.
It's
and I think more than pharma, that's what I'm thinking. Medical device makers are the ones that stand to really gain with this kind of, because anything that they have to use as an exercise after that, or something that makes the success of that device dependent on the follow through by the patients, that will succeed. And I don't know whether enough medical device makers are really, or maybe I should rephrase that, could be working for people who are having B2C medical device makers. Maybe B2B, they don't need this app, they go there and train it. So that's what I'm thinking. Those are the places where these kind of apps or companion apps will work. But for regular drug or taking Wegovy or whatever, that there is no success on that. And so the way that the pharma industry is starting these pilots, and then I think they are basically killing them. It's kind of like those VCs come in and throw money at some sort of digital health company, because that extra push to grow itself is killing many of those startups, where you have to have deliberate, slow, considered growth in many of these medical device companies.
But let's also think about one aspect of this story, which is the cost of a drug. The higher the cost of a drug, the easier it is to justify for a pharma to have this market, to have the companion solution fully funded by pharma, because it's possible for them to keep an effectively stream of proofs that the drug itself is working. And that justifies a relatively high price of a drug. Maybe it's some new drug that came out recently and it has a specific USP. With the companion solution, you have all the time the evidence to prove to the authorities that it's still effective, it's working, it's like it's even better than our clinical trial, and therefore the price needs to stay high. So whenever it is the possibility for the pharma to kind of identify the niche that we can win extra data such that we win with authorities, there is a space for a companion app that would be funded.
So what you're saying is actually the value-based pricing aspect in pharma. So, and pharma is talking about value-based pricing since decades. So now my critical question, why is it just not more adopted?
I think it's adopted. It's just that we don't see it on a big scale, because it makes sense in such a small drugs that we simply are not exposed to them.
Yes. Yeah. That might be the reason. Yeah. Because value-based pricing at the end of the day is all about evidence in order to, as you said, have the rationale why you need that price where it is.
By the way, that's maybe to loop back onto the value-based pricing. One of the experiments where we tried to push with Carity through authorities was to offer to consider digital health solutions like ours in the similar framework as high-cost medications, where the risk-sharing agreement has to be signed between the manufacturer and the government. If the efficacy is there all the time, then we get reimbursed. One possible approach in solutions like ours, okay, we are ready to prove the efficacy because we are ready to collect the data for that out of the box, because the solution is optimized for that. So compared to the drugs, we don't need to invest into companion apps. We have our own streams of data. So it is relatively low cost for us to collect this data. So it's possible for us to kind of engage into the contract with the government at a lower cost than it is for farmer. It's a nice theoretical framework. Maybe one day it will materialize itself. It's not there yet.
Which brings me to the final main question is, I think we both discussed about this thing that value-based care, people are trying to get into value-based care. In Switzerland, I did a deep research and I found there are a couple of pilots running and they're really talking about that. But there is also a Swiss VBHC website and organization, although I reached out to them and nobody came back to me. So I don't know how seriously they are even looking at these kind of operations. So what do you think and what's your experience with that kind of initiatives in Switzerland? What are the chances that it is even going to be implemented?
Well, we know that it's already in implementation, and if the results of this implementation going to be successful, then I don't see why it will not be rolled out wider on the country.
And if that comes,
And with that, I also see this as a great place for various digital health solutions, diagnostics, startups in rehabilitation, everything. It's great if it would be first tried in that context, because it's much simpler and cheaper to be integrated in this context.
Yeah.
But right now, the options are not many. There are more or less 2 regions in one canton where it is tried.
Andreas?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, I don't want to be negative here, but it's a little bit like...
That's your role. We are supposed to be the bandicoots who talk about what's not going.
That's why I need to make that statement now. We talked a lot about pharma over the last decade, spending a lot of money on digital health and so on, going from pilot to another pilot in order to pilot the third pilot and never make it. And I think if you look at a country like Switzerland, when you say, okay, now let's pilot in certain regions, I mean, these regions were picked for a reason, the way I see it. If you want to pilot certain value-based care models, I hope it doesn't stay with pilots.
Yes.
Because again, the whole system change, and that's something where I see the big hurdles. Yeah, if you want the whole system to change, then this is I don't know who can bear the weight of that project.
No, I thought I will get into the Switzerland at the ground floor because we have been doing a lot of work on value-based care, and I really hope that, because Switzerland being a small country, they can see a really big effect with that change, and it's easier for them to affect that change rather than this fee-for-service model, which is, as we discovered, is killing innovation. Nobody is interested in bringing new innovation. Nobody is interested in outcomes, right? If that changed...
It's a very, very good point. Not just the other day, I think on Friday or even on Saturday, since these things are delivered digitally now, I got my how's it called, from my health insurance, the new policy, yeah, for 2026. And we all heard in Switzerland that the premiums are raising around 4-point-something%, if I remember correctly, on average. I saw in the beginning, I said, okay, oh no, I have to pay so much more. Then I figured out, okay, it's less than this average 4-point-something%. So I might be on the lucky side. And then there was a section which was talking about what additional benefits I'm getting from this more money I'm paying. And if I read through these benefits, I won't go into the specifics now, but it was kind of 4 buckets, and actually the first 3 buckets, they don't apply to me. If I would have to decide if I want to buy this package or not, I would always have ticked no. The third one has, under certain risk considerations, has big benefits. Yeah? So that's a good thing to do. But every 2 years or every couple of years, this just raising. Yeah? So something in this system needs to happen. And I often thought about, okay, I have colleagues in the US who are, I don't know, managed in a context with Kaiser Permanente or whatever models, or I have colleagues in other countries which are kind of managed care models by healthcare system. I always thought, okay, what would it mean to me? Yeah. And still back to what I said before, the question is, if you want to change this very actively, can you make a system change? Or is it something where, I don't know, you give up on a certain package of this fee for service in order to get a value-based care package for that coverage and then step by step move into this direction?
You know, when I was in the US, I couldn't go and take a lab test directly from the laboratory. You had to have a prescription. And I think that's pretty much the same thing in Switzerland, because I've lived in both countries, and Switzerland is a miniature version of the American system. That's what I feel. The same shitty insurance policies, regulations, getting reimbursed, going in network, all those kind of things, right? And then we have this feeling in the West where we all live that, oh, the developed countries don't have access to healthcare, all of them. Just one simple example, right? I don't know whether we can even imagine this. Is I'm sitting in my office, I have a number, I call them, they come to your home and they take your blood test and all the other things. I did like 10 tests, including hematology, renal, everything, right? The whole thing, testosterone, PSA, everything. Do you know how much I paid? It's less than 50 francs for the whole thing. And they come to you. That is real physical accessibility. There are 7 super specialty hospitals within a 10-kilometer range of my Indian office. 7 super specialty hospitals with the latest equipment, and the prices are 1/3 to 1/10 of the prices we people pay over there, even without value-based care. And here people think that they're paying. So I don't know, we are living in some weird world where we think we are paying 35% taxes or more, and then we are not getting any service. We are paying $1,500 or something. For somebody who's 60, you pay about $1,000 in insurance premium or more per month. And you are getting, I don't want to use that word, but that's what you're getting. So it's all...
I think we shouldn't be too negative here. I think Switzerland is, yes, one of the most expensive healthcare systems worldwide, but it's also a system where you probably have very good access. So if you need something, you get an appointment in a decent time span, where in other surrounding countries you wait for 2 months and more. It's a balance, yeah. It's a balance of what you want to have.
And Andreas,
nice travel is more with the.
I'm going to disagree with you here. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to disagree with you here, because we in this podcast discussed where Carsten brought up that thing also. He had to wait 2 months to get an appointment with a doctor. Me too. A new patient, right? New patient registration. It took me 2.5 months to get appointment. So it's not. UK is even worse.
I had a case of 6 months here in Switzerland, so it's all good.
Oh, yeah.
But
So-
I think
There
we're
is
kind of...
no more MRI machines than in Switzerland.
Actually, there is a great case about the MRI machine. There is a super machine, like one of 3 most powerful machines in the basement of the Balgris Center, which is not allowed to be used for medical diagnostic. It's allowed to be used only for the research, because manufacturer, Siemens, was not willing for that powerful machine to go through a medical certification. So it is the unique device. It can do so much for whatever your health diagnostic requires, but not for medical use case. Like, you can do rats, you can do some experiments with whatever else. There is a cost of certification that someone doesn't want to bear. But
Anyway,
maybe
so-
just one
Go
topic
ahead,
I
go
wanted to add to your discussion here. It's we're right now comparing costs running in value-based care versus the insurance-based system. What I think, like, long term, this would average itself. Where the averaging is not happening, where this convergence is not happening, is the cost of some services. They, especially with compounds, we see it. Once they are fixed in the system, they will stay that way forever. And this is where the biggest potential is. Like, this is where kind of the long-term observation, patients' reported outcomes, somehow some other form of post-market surveillance, and the constant reevaluation of these, not manually, of course, because that's not scalable, by some automated processes, and constant renegotiation, constant adjustment of the prices of services that happen. This is where the saving potential is, in my opinion. We hear anecdotes about some misuses of the system that appear because of certain things being fixed 30 years ago and never been changed again.
So it's basically everywhere where the system incentivizes driving volumes.
So let me ask you this, Aliaksei, as a parting thing. What's next for you? What's your vision? What is your desire? What are you trying to do next? Or you haven't thought
First of
about
all,
it?
stay tuned. I'm looking into this as we're discussing it right now. But practically, it's of course AI in healthcare where the biggest potential that I see right now. And I do some experiments myself as a technical person.
And we talked about all of that for some time.
Yeah, it's we'll see which of the directions it will end up being, but there are plenty of directions, and the potential for AI to be used in the healthcare is a norm to a degree that I can bet we will have a new layer soon between patient and GP, and this will be AI. So if today we have GP in many cases and then the specialist, we'll have a new layer soon in between.
You think the primary care provider is going to be replaced by AI?
Not replaced, heavily enabled. A lot of steps in this process, they will naturally be kind of double checked, second eyed, or even first prepared by some form of ML based workflow. It's only a question of it's very difficult right now to say where it is wise to apply it and where it's a waste of time. We have to basically try, and then eventually it will saturate somewhere.
Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I, in my extreme vigorousness, did not allow you to? I'm sorry.
Well, all form of shameless plugs, what I'm looking into right now, like this health technology assessment automation, I can spend another few hours discussing what's possible there and how to bring the cost of 100,000 to tens of thousands. But if anyone is interested, please contact me directly. We'll have a lot to discuss.
No, but give us a 5 minutes summary of if you want to.
Thank you. Look, that became quite clear for me that as a startup, we spent quite an amount of money trying to get the health technology assessment for us. While the modeling for a digital health tool, the economic modeling, is not the same as economical modeling for a complex molecule that pharma needs. In our case, we would have been very well satisfied by some off-the-shelf economic model that one of many that were created in the past decades, used as a template. We only need to provide the correct inputs to this. In all of these steps, the selection of health technology, cost-effectiveness model, literature research can be highly automated with AI, such that once it is done and there is a draft of this product, and then somehow there is a place for an expert to be in the loop of this generation, it would give a researcher or a consultant who is working in the economic dossier preparation an ability to serve startups with, let's say, 20 hours of consulting work rather than 400 hours of consulting work required to produce a dossier. There is an obvious saving potential. I'm trying to work it through right now, all the implementation details, and I'm looking for experts to collaborate with, because I do believe it's not a tool to replace an expert. It's actually a tool to help experts to serve a different market of startups that spend way less than a pharma.
Andreas, this is your area, so you can talk.
I think that's for sure a space which shouldn't be underestimated. I always thought about there is so much money invested into especially digital health startups, and a lot of the money was actually invested into driving the learning curve of people for things which are actually known, but they just didn't know it. Yeah? And so supporting that process makes totally sense, especially also, I was in former times once involved in a startup activity in the following context. It was not digital health. It was in antibiotics research or development. Yeah? There are startups who work on antibiotics, but usually they have an even higher failure rate than all the other startups because the commercialization window of antibiotics is very small given resistance. And so it was a combination of a CRO trying to support actually clinical development for antibiotics and a, let's call it, venture fund in order to build up a portfolio where you actually accelerate the piece, which is very well known in the industry, being the clinical development after you have shown that something works, to accelerate that process with at that time it was manpower, brain power, process support across a portfolio of such projects in order to actually enlarge the commercialization window of respective antibiotics. At the end of the day, it failed because the people out of that CRO company, they were service company people. So they were used to being paid for hours or being paid for the project time they are doing. And they were not mentally capable of engaging into that model where you need to be paid across a portfolio or something. So, I mean, that was just one example, but I strongly believe that in this space, especially digital health, you can accelerate a lot if you approach it in a much more systematic way. Yeah. It's also, I mean, you worked with Bright Insight. I looked into Bright Insight in a certain context at a former company in, I think, 2018, 19 or something. We had a project run by the company, which then ended up to be Bright Insight, if I remember correctly. And this was also an approach which tried to bring all these digital innovators kind of a stack, which well-known, this just works, and let's standardize this one. And I think this needs to happen in order to bring kind of effectiveness of investment money in that space, and in order to not invest into pitfalls which are obvious actually from the beginning if you know them.
Right. It's actually reminds me that one of the feedbacks I received for what I'm trying to do right now is that I shall not be even offering it to consultants. I shall be offering it to VC firms that actually invest in whatever is going to be assessed with the instrument like this.
I think that's a very good idea, although I believe it's not that easy because investment firms, sometimes they just function in a total different way than we scientists or engineers. Yeah? They see, I have this much money, I need a portfolio of that size, and then one will make it. And the randomness will make me successful, yeah. And we are talking about systematics will make me successful. So this
exactly, it's
two different points of view. I think it's the right place to play, but still, it's not that easy to win with investors on that.
Make an entire episode of how VCs function, because there are some who are really good and they know their stuff. Then there are some who are just because they have some money or they ran an operation and they think that they can do stuff, and they behave like banks pretty much. You know, they audit your financials, and it's kind of like asking for a loan from a bank. That is how they look at those kind of things, not looking at potential. So there's a whole bunch of different ways of how they do things. And you yourself, I was wondering earlier when they said when VCs invest, they should look at the reimbursement model and the potential. Without that, they are still, like you said, right, they're investing in all these startups and they fail. So they should have looked at this thing first before they back a firm or any other thing, which they don't. So they come in all sizes. Anyway, that's another conversation.
Right.
Unless you have anything more to add to this, we can continue the conversation after the recording. But I'll just say that honestly, it was a pleasure talking to you, Aliaksei, because
and to me, Sam, Andreas, it's a big pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely.
I'd love to meet you now in person somewhere.
We need to arrange for that. Yes.
Yes. I'll tell you my plans after this recording. So anyway, thank you all very much for today's episode. It's been a pleasure, and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.